Why does God allow suffering? Well, the answer can already be found in the book of Genesis. God envisioned a harmony with man, but when man surrendered to sin or gave in to sin, then suffering actually entered this world. These days, I listened to a nice lecture by Father Ivica Raguš from Đakovo. He commented on the situation with Corona and all that. He said, "We are already under punishment. We have been punished, and the greatest punishment that exists for man is death." And why do we die? We die because we have sinned. And that is our greatest punishment. That is why all the other punishments that come in life, such as illness or some uncomfortable situation related to the soul and the like, are not even close to the punishment of death that we all have to go through. And the cause of that is sin. We are actually dying because we once sinned. But in this life, God gives us space, love, and freedom to know Him, to return to Him. That is why there is the final judgment. Why were the angels condemned immediately? It is said that as soon as they sinned against God, they were immediately condemned. It happened because the angels had full awareness of who God is. And despite that love in which they had full awareness of who God is, they turned away from God and were automatically condemned. But man will not be immediately condemned. He has the final judgment because man has no absolute insight into who God is. God is always mystery for man. In that mystery, we have turned away from God, but God is coming for us nonetheless. Well, that is now the meaning of the incarnation through which Jesus redeems us on the cross. This means that on this earth, we cannot avoid dying. Every man will die. That is why the Greeks said, all men are mortal. When you say man, you say someone is already mortal. Well, suffering and the cross can be different and are different. How? The cross is something necessarily Christian. What makes us Christians recognizable in this world is no longer the sign of the fish, the ichthys, which the first Christians used, but the cross. Today, when you put a cross on someone's neck, and after all, at the time when the Ottomans ruled, our people got tattoos in the sign of the cross. It was the sign of recognition that we are Christians. And what about suffering? There is suffering among Hindus, there is suffering in Islam, there is suffering among atheists. So suffering is spread all over the world, but many people will not equate their suffering with the cross, while we Christians necessarily and always equate our suffering with the cross. And in this way, our suffering one day becomes identical with the cross. That is why Christians in our region will not say, I suffer, but I carry the cross. It is the same for us. The cross equals suffering in Christianity. But someone who is not a Christian will never equate his suffering with the cross. He will say, I suffer, I am sick, but he will not mention the cross in a single word. That is why it is a blessing for us Christians, that we can always give meaning to our suffering, and that meaning is actually the cross. For if Christ suffered, then we also suffer with Him. Well, I recently said that whoever suffers, he is blessed, no matter how absurd it may sound. St. Louis de Montfort said, every time when I didn't suffer, it was a waste of time. This is why he says in his writing, when he says goodbye to this world, of what he regrets. He only says, I regret for not suffering more. Why? For suffering in this world frees you from suffering in the world to come. I myself watched some people who had been sick for a long time and who were dying in their beds. Then I wondered, why is that so, and why we don't all die equally? Because we are aware that someone suffers more in dying than someone else. Our people say, well, thank God he didn't suffer. It certainly seeks to avoid switching. Just like when you do colloquia at the academy, so what you solved in the colloquium is easier on the exam later. You're exempt from it on the exam. It is the same with suffering. A man who has suffered a lot on earth, remember that story about poor Lazarus, he will eventually get satisfaction. He may also be freed from the torments of purgatory because he passed that purgatory on earth. So it is not just a problem for people who have suffered. It will be a bigger problem for people who have gone through this world without suffering. Here's what I want to say. Our suffering is not meaningless. Someday we will get an answer to suffering, especially when we come to heaven. Then suffering will be rewarded. Well, the best answer lies in trusting completely in God and actually putting all our faith in God. Because somehow God allowed us all that and God gave us everything. God has given us both people and crosses, as well as people we have lost. We can think of some people we have lost and say, "Oh my God, they're gone." But we can also thank God for giving us the opportunity to meet those people, that someone could be my father, that someone could be my mother, that someone could be my child, even though he lived for a year and died as a baby. But thank God, because God gave me the opportunity to meet him, to see him. A woman who has lost a child in her womb can say, "Thank God I could get pregnant at all, that I could have that life in me and at all, and feel like a mother." I recently read one good sentence about Mary. It is said of Mary that she did not even weep when she fled to Egypt or while standing on Calvary. The question is, did Our Lady cry? Now, it sounds a little hard for me to understand how it is that Our Lady did not cry. And the author says, tears are a sign of protest. Mary may have been completely without tears, but what is the substitute for those tears? It is her faith, her trust in the Lord. I think the cross is best accepted in that sense when one actually says, "I take that cross." The worst thing in life is when a man resists the cross. Man is most exhausted when he flees from the cross, when he seeks surrogates, substitutes for his cross. I don't want this cross, so I'm running away from it. For me, and I see that also in my life, that's what exhausts me. And when a man surrenders completely. Ratzinger, for example, uses one interesting example. Some shipwrecked man was thrown to float the sea and he died, but before they threw him to float at sea, they tied him to a cross. The plot of a movie starts like this. A missionary is tied to a cross and he sails that sea, floating actually on the surface of the sea. This is the example that Ratzinger uses. That man is floating, he doesn't know where he will end up, and his cross to which he is tied is actually his boat that will save him and enable him to come, to land somewhere on the shore. And he can't even break away from the cross because he's tied up to it. Such an example is a reflection of our lives. If we untie ourselves from that cross, we will surely sink, and the mainland will eventually appear, and then that cross will take us to the other shore. Thank you and greetings to all viewers.